Welcome back. Today's video is about your responsibilities as an Azure engineer and what you would be expecting if you landed a role as a system engineer or as an administrator with some Azure experience. So once you've landed the role, you're going to be thinking to yourself, what am I going to be doing? So today I'm going to explain to you what we expect from someone who has an Azure engineering role and what their roles and responsibilities might be as part of their day-to-day job. Before we get started, like you're going to smash your new role, smash that like button, smash the subscribe button. I'm making lots of videos about IT content, my M365, Microsoft Azure, all cloud sort of fun type of things. So if you want to see more and you're getting value out of these ones, please hit the subscribe button. It really motivates me to keep making more videos. All right, let's go. So one of the first things you're going to be expected to do is be able to create virtual machines. So virtual machines, they're virtualized compute basically, whether you're creating a Windows server or a Linux server or some sort of appliance, you're going to be expected to be able to provision a new device. Once upon a time, we used to really rely on the project teams to create these virtual machines, but now that we're in Azure and we sort of have a lot more flexibility and we have the ability to turn off machines, turn on machines, scale up, scale down, we really expect the BAU teams to be able to do this type of thing. So that's one of the things that's going to be expected of you. So it's very good if you sort of begin to understand a lot more about virtual machines prior to starting your role. Okay, patching. Patching is one of those things that BAU teams would love to get rid of, but it's a necessary evil. We try to do the one that's the most efficient for the business itself. So if the business has SCCM still, or if they're using something like WSUS still out in the wild, then that's fine. When we just expect you to keep using that. But as a service improvement, and maybe as customers tend to move more into Azure and want to utilize more of the services, it's great if we can actually get them to use Microsoft Azure services for patching, something like Azure Update Manager or something along those lines that will sort of help the customer get a bit more out of Azure as well. Overseeing costs in Microsoft Azure, so making sure that your customer or that the organization you're working for has a good idea of what they're spending the money on. So making sure that they have things like tagging set up, making sure that they're not paying for virtual machines that are way too big for what they need, and haven't over provisioned storage, all those type of things that you would normally kind of be responsible for back in the on-premises world. You really need to pay attention to Microsoft Azure, because one day your manager is going to come along and they're going to be upset with you because you haven't noticed that a VM has been running at like 10% usage and it's costing the business $1,000 a month or something like that. So be aware of that. That is a very important one. We do come across that a lot, and we would like all our engineers to have the accountability, or we would like all our engineers to have the responsibility of understanding what the customer is getting charged for in Microsoft Azure. Keeping an eye on the advisor and the security center, whatever it's called these days, we need to make sure that our engineers are actually have their head stuck into the security center and the advisor and looking at the tips and what's coming up. So things like reliability, things like resilience, things like cost, performance, we need to make sure that all of those are being watched by our engineers. So that's going to be your responsibility. You're going to want to actually be actively looking at everything in there, because it's constantly updated and it's going to feel like you're chasing your tail, but you just have to show that you are responsible for it and that you are actually attempting to make some changes that sort of get some of those warnings or some of those informational tips ticked off. I touched on this briefly before, but service improvement is very important. So you will be administering an environment that is the way it is. So you're not actually a project engineer, you're not an architect, you'll be handed an environment in a certain way and you'll be expected to manage it. That doesn't mean that you cannot give your own recommendations on what you've seen in the past based on experience on how you can change things for the better. So for example, if you see a virtual machine that is maybe oversized, then you can recommend that we should actually bring the size down to save a bit of cost. Or maybe you're seeing two machines that do the same thing, but you're not actually utilizing a load balancer. Then you can go in and say, guys, I think we need to use a load balancer here to get the most out of Microsoft Azure, or else maybe we should turn one of them off and have only one of them on at a time or something like that. But it's very important that you are continuously looking on how you can actually improve your customer's environment. Governance is really important. So as a architect myself and someone who actually implements projects, we put in a level of governance at the start of a project, and we cover things like tagging, like resource locks, like backups and DR, and we have a very structured type of way that we develop and we implement. What happens after implementation is that customers sort of typically will get a bit of sprawl. So we can be as strict as we want to be during the deployment, but just general nature of IT is that things generally change. People make little small changes here and there, and configuration drift just happens. Azure policy is there to stop that from happening, but you do need to be aware of the governance and compliance that actually needs to be imposed on the resources within that subscription. So things like tagging, making sure that every single resource has a tag so that the customer can actually see what's going on and the relevant tags apply. Things like backups and DR, we need to make sure that every resource has some sort of backup applied to it if necessary, or has some sort of DR running for it, or some sort of service that's running for it as a DR service. We also need to make sure we meet compliance. So things like data sovereignty, we need to make sure that, for example, all your data is in a certain location, if that's part of the compliance framework that you have to meet. So maybe you need to have all of your data in Australia East, then you're going to have to make sure that all that data is in Australia East. You really need to understand that that's important as an engineer, because you're the person that's in that environment day in, day out. Security of the resources and the subscription itself. So making sure that only the right people have access to it, making sure that applications don't have too much access, making sure that privileged roles are applied in a manner where it's least privileged. So if a user needs access to reset passwords, we're not setting them a role like global administrator. So making sure that you have an idea of how security works, what to look for in terms of a breach and in terms of activity, in terms of suspicious behavior. It's very important that you understand that type of thing, because sometimes your manager or sometimes a customer will come to you and they'll tell you something that happened and they want you to investigate. And you need to be able to speak about it off the top of your head. You can't be sitting there researching what's correct. You need to actually know that this person should have this access, and maybe they shouldn't have been in here, maybe they shouldn't have global admin, or maybe someone turned off MFA for this user, etc. It's important that you understand those security practices like the back of your hand. So I hope that helps you. I hope that is actually insightful to your day-to-day sort of role in a Microsoft Azure engineering role. I think you're going to be able to smash your new role. And if you do smash your new role, then smash the like button, smash the subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.